I came home from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, and the house was too quiet. I had been gone for 4 days. My mother had suffered a minor stroke at her care home in Kelowna, and I had driven the 4 hours there alone, sat beside her bed, held her hand through the scans, spoken to the neurologist, arranged the adjustments to her care plan, and driven back. 4 days of sleeping in a motel off Highway 97, eating Tim Hortons soup for dinner, calling home every evening and getting short answers from my husband that I told myself meant nothing. The house should have had noise in it. My husband's truck was in the driveway. My daughter's car was parked on the street. And when I pushed open the front door with my overnight bags still on my shoulder, I saw them all sitting in the living room, my husband, my daughter, and my husband's sister arranged on the couches like they had been waiting, like they had rehearsed where to sit. Nobody stood up. Nobody said welcome home. My husband looked at the floor, my daughter looked at her hands, and my sister-in-law, a woman I had welcomed into my home for 26 years of holidays and birthdays and Sunday dinners, looked directly at me with an expression I can only describe as pity mixed with something uglier, something like relief. My husband cleared his throat and said, "Margaret, we need to talk." I set my bag down slowly. I was 63 years old. I had just spent 4 days managing a medical crisis alone, and something in the air of my own living room told me that whatever was about to happen had been planned while I was gone, possibly long before that. I sat down in the armchair across from them. I did not take off my coat. "Okay," I said. "Talk." My husband's name is Robert. We had been married for 28 years. He was a civil engineer, semi-retired, careful with money in the way that people who grew up without it tend to be. I had loved him for a long time. Maybe I had stopped seeing him clearly somewhere in the middle of all those years, the way you stop noticing the furniture in a room you live in every day. He told me he wanted a divorce. He told me he had been unhappy for years. He told me he had developed feelings for someone else. I asked him who. He did not answer immediately, and in that pause I watched my sister-in-law shift in her seat and look away toward the window, and I understood without needing to hear it said, "How long?" I said. It was not really a question. Robert said, "Margaret, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at my daughter. She was 31 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, or so I had always believed. She was looking at her phone now, which she had not been doing a moment before, which told me she could not look at me. "Danielle," I said. She looked up. "Did you know about this before today?" She pressed her lips together. That was my answer. I had driven back from Kelowna that morning thinking about my mother's recovery timeline and whether we needed to hire an additional personal support worker and whether the care home's physiotherapy program was adequate. I had stopped at a Petro-Canada outside of Hope to fill up and buy a coffee. I had listened to the radio and thought about nothing in particular for long stretches of highway. And the entire time, the 3 people sitting across from me in my living room had been here, in this house, deciding how to tell me that my life was being reorganized without my input. Robert began explaining things, legal things. He had spoken to a lawyer, he said. He wanted to keep the house. He believed that given the value of his pension and the way the assets were structured, a fair settlement could be reached without things becoming adversarial. He used the word adversarial. He had clearly practiced saying all of this. My sister-in-law said, quietly, "Margaret, I know this is a shock, but Robert and we didn't plan for this to happen." I looked at her for a long moment. Her name is Sandra. She had been at our wedding. She had been in the delivery room when Danielle was born because Robert was stuck in traffic on the Coquihalla, and I had called her in a panic. She had sat at my kitchen table and cried to me when her own marriage ended 12 years ago, and I had poured her wine and told her she deserved better. "Sandra," I said very calmly, "I would like you to leave my house." Robert said, "This is what I'm talking about, Margaret. This kind of reaction. She can wait in her car," I said, "or she can drive home. I don't particularly mind which, but she will leave this room while I speak with my husband." Sandra left. I heard the front door close. Robert talked for another 40 minutes. I let him. I asked very few questions. I noted the things he said and the things he did not say, the way I had learned to do over 30 years of working as a certified financial planner. I had built a career on listening to what people told me about their money and understanding that the real story was usually in the details they glossed over. Robert glossed over a great many details. When he was finished, I told him I needed time to process everything. He looked relieved, which told me he had expected more of a fight. He asked if I was going to be all right. I said yes. He said he was sorry. And I believed that he meant it in the limited way that people mean it when they are sorry about the consequences of a thing, but not about the thing itself. That night I slept in the guest room. I lay in the dark and I did not cry. I thought instead. I thought for a very long time. Here is what Robert did not know about me. 30 years ago, when I was starting my practice, I had structured nearly everything in our financial life. The investments, the joint accounts, the beneficiary designations, the corporate holding accounts we had set up when Robert's engineering income grew large enough to make incorporation worthwhile. I had done all of it with a care that Robert appreciated without really understanding. He had signed the documents I put in front of him and trusted me completely, which had always seemed like a gift. It was only now that I understood it was also a record. Our house in North Vancouver was held in joint tenancy, which meant that Robert's assumption that he could simply keep it was legally complicated. Our registered accounts were structured in ways his hastily consulted lawyer had likely not fully mapped. And our corporate holding company, a numbered company we had incorporated in BC 17 years ago to hold our investment properties, had a shareholder agreement that I had drafted with our accountant and which contained, among other provisions, a clause that I had insisted upon and which Robert had signed on a Tuesday morning in 2008 without reading the full document. I know he didn't read it because he had a site meeting in an hour, and he asked me to just show him where to sign. The clause dealt with what happened to shares in the event of marital breakdown. It was not unusual language. It was, in fact, a fairly standard protective measure that any competent financial planner would recommend, but it was specific. And in our specific case, it meant that the shares Robert believed he would walk away with were, upon formal separation initiated by either party, subject to a right of first refusal by the other shareholder, which was me at the value stated in the original agreement, a value set in 2008. The properties had done very well since 2008. I called my own lawyer the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and she had been my client before she became my counsel, which meant she understood exactly how our finances were structured because I had helped structure them. I explained the situation. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Margaret, do you still have your copy of the shareholder agreement?" I told her it was in the fireproof cabinet in my home office, the one Robert had never asked to look inside because he trusted me to handle it, the one I had a key for and he did not. Patricia said, "Okay, don't move anything. Don't say anything to Robert about the holding company yet. Let me make some calls." I went back to the kitchen and made myself oatmeal and listened to CBC radio while I ate it. Robert was uncomfortable around me in those first days. He had expected, I think, that I would beg or rage or dissolve. He did not know what to do with my steadiness. He asked twice if I had spoken to a lawyer yet. I told him I was in the process of gathering information, which was true. Danielle called me 3 days after the conversation in the living room. She said she wanted to explain her side of things. I listened. She said she had known about her father and her aunt for almost 8 months. She said she had felt caught in the middle and didn't know what to do. She said she hoped I could understand that she loved us both and this had been incredibly difficult for her. I told her I understood. Then I said, very gently, "I'm going to need some time on my own, sweetheart. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." She started to cry. I said goodnight and I hung up. I packed a bag that weekend and told Robert I was going to stay with my friend Carol in West Vancouver for a few weeks, while we both had some space. He thought this was sensible. He walked me to my car and he hugged me, and I let him, and I drove away. Carol had been my closest friend for 31 years. She was a retired school principal with a guest room and very strong opinions about people who behave badly, and when I arrived at her door and told her everything, she put the kettle on and said, "Tell me what you need." What I needed was her dining room table, my laptop, and 12 uninterrupted days. Patricia and I worked through the implications of the shareholder agreement carefully and methodically. The holding company owned 2 investment properties, one in Squamish, one in the Okanagan that had appreciated significantly. The 2008 valuation in the agreement was a fraction of their current market value. Under the right of first refusal clause, I could acquire Robert's shares at the 2008 price upon formal separation. Robert's lawyer caught the clause on the 3rd week. I know this because Robert called me, and for the first time since the living room his voice was not carefully composed. "Margaret," he said, "your lawyer is being unreasonable." "I haven't asked Patricia to be unreasonable," I said. "I've asked her to be accurate." "That clause, that's not how it was meant to function. It is a legally executed shareholder agreement, Robert. You signed it." Silence. "I need you to understand," he said, "that I am willing to be fair about this." "I know you are," I said, "and the agreement is the fair standard we both agreed to in 2008. I'll be in touch through Patricia." I hung up and went to make tea. What followed took several months, and I will not pretend it was simple or painless. Dividing a life you built with someone over 28 years is not clean, even when you hold the stronger legal position. There were weeks that were hard. There were nights at Carol's dining room table when I sat with my tea going cold and felt the particular grief of realizing that someone you loved was a different person than you thought, and wondering how long they had been that different person, and whether any of it had been real. I did cry, eventually. Just not in front of anyone who was going to report it back to Robert. The settlement was finalized 7 months after that Thursday afternoon when I came home to a quiet house. Under the terms, I exercised the right of first refusal and acquired Robert's shares in the holding company at the 2008 valuation. I retained my registered accounts in full. The North Vancouver house was sold, and the proceeds divided, which meant Robert received significantly less than he had anticipated when he and his lawyer had originally mapped things out. He and Sandra moved into a rented townhouse in Burnaby. Danielle called me the month after the settlement. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she missed me. She said she had gone to see a therapist, which I was genuinely glad to hear, because I think she had needed one for quite some time. She asked if I would meet her for coffee. I said yes. Not immediately. I asked her to give me another 2 weeks. But yes, we met at a cafe in Gastown on a Saturday morning in October. She looked tired and younger than her age at the same time, the way people do when they've been doing hard internal work. She apologized. It was a real apology. Not an explanation dressed up as an apology, but an actual acknowledgement of what she had done and why it had been wrong and what it had cost me. I had not been certain, walking in, that I would be ready to receive it. I found that I was. We talked for 2 hours. I did not tell her everything about the settlement. Some of that is between me and Patricia, but I told her enough that she understood I was not the one who had ended up on the losing end of things. She laughed, a short, surprised sound, and said, "Mom, you always were the one who read the fine print." "I did try to tell your father that," I said. "I have a different life now. I rent a condo in North Vancouver with a view of the inlet that I sit and look at most mornings with my coffee. I have taken on a small number of financial planning clients again, retired people mostly, because I find I like the work more than I expected to when I went back to it. Carol and I walk the seawall on Saturdays. My mother is doing better, steady and sharp, and I drive to Kelowna to see her every 6 weeks. Sandra and Robert are still together, as far as I know. I don't ask and no one tells me. Here is the thing I come back to when I think about that Thursday afternoon and what came after. I was 63 years old, and I had just spent 4 days at my mother's bedside, and I walked into a room full of people I loved who were about to tell me my life was being taken from me. And I sat down in that armchair with my coat still on and I thought, I know things they don't know I know. I built things they don't know exist. I have been careful in ways that are going to matter right now. I had not built those things because I anticipated betrayal. I had built them because I was good at my job, and because careful structures protect everyone, and because I had always believed that the foundation of anything worthwhile is the work you put in before you ever need it. It turned out I needed it. The most dangerous thing about quietly doing things right for 30 years is that by the time anyone realizes what you've built, it's already built. I'm 64 years old now. I drink my coffee and I look at the inlet and I think, I have enough. I have more than enough. And everything I have, I earned twice, once when I built it, and once when I kept it.